Hello and welcome, my name is Racho, and today we will be covering Equinox. Yes, we're back in Warframe after my first Descendant video, and we are here to cover Equinox. Equinox is another one of those frames that, if you remember from my tier list, I put her in the I haven't played her enough list, because at the time I hadn't really played around with her very much, just like with Zephyr. So because of that, I will be leaving my ranking of Equinox at the end of this video. So if you're interested in hearing my ranking, do wait to the end to hear that. Otherwise, feel free to just listen to my build explanations or my guide on her abilities, and then leave before the ranking. That's up to you. Equinox is a very cool Warframe. She has a very fun style that is very unique. She has two forms: a dark and a light form, a dark and a night form, and a day and night form. And depending on which form you're in, it depends on the different effects from her abilities. You could liken her to Sethergoth, except Sethergoth works a bit differently, as the day and the night form for Equinox are the same frame with the same stats and the same modding space, where Sethergoth's alternate form, his exalted shadow, is a actual separate Warframe with its own stats, own abilities, and all that stuff. But they are similar in the fact that they both have two different ability sets in a way, and they're really the only two Warframes that have that. Equinox's passive is basically a knockoff Equilibrium, and it's a weaker version of it. It works the same: when you pick up energy orbs, you get some health back; when you pick up health orbs, you get some energy back. Except you only get 10% of the other, where Equilibrium can go up to 110%, so it is a much worse version of Equilibrium. Her first ability is Metamorphosis, which is the ability to switch between each form. This ability is one of two ways to actually change forms. The other way is your mission color. Your mission color will determine which form you start the mission in. So and it's the first emission color, not the second one, only the first one. So if your first emission color is set to light colors, you will start the mission in the day form. And if it's set to dark colors, you will start the mission in night form. So if you Helminth off her first ability, make sure you set your mission colors to the form that you want to be in. So, casting the ability will obviously switch to the opposite form you're in. If you're in day form, you'll get switched to night form. Night form, switch to day form. Depending on which form you switch into, you'll gain different buffs. If you switch into the night form, you will gain an extra 250 armor and an extra 150 shields. If you switch into the day form, you'll get a 25% base weapon buff and a 15% movement speed buff. The buff you get from switching form will last for 25 seconds. However, the effects of the buff decline over that period. So, say you're 50% the way through the duration of the ability, you'll only get 50% the effectiveness of the buffs. That, paired with the fact that the buffs are honestly really small, makes the buffs pretty useless, making this ability's only use actually switching between forms, which unfortunately also isn't really useful with the way her kit is currently set up. The augment for her first ability will leave behind a Spectre in the form of whichever form you switch out of. So if you switch to night form from day form, you'll leave behind a day Spectre that lasts for 10 seconds. The day Spectre will not be able to cast any. The Spectre will not be able to cast any abilities, and it also uses the weapon that you had equipped at the time of casting the ability, and it will not cycle between them. Equinox's second ability is called Rest and Rage. First of all, the effects that carry over from both versions of this ability. She will place one of the two effects of this ability on a single target. You target one enemy and the effect of this ability will be placed on them. However, the ability does have a 5-minute AoE that is affected by range, and any enemy that is also caught within the AoE centered around the target will then also be affected by this ability. In day form, you will be able to cast Rage. Enemies affected by the ability will have an increased movement speed by 20%, but also making them 50% more vulnerable to all forms of damage. So it's basically a worse form of Nova's Fourth, as it isn't a full AoE. However, the movement speed buff to enemies and also the damage on ability is both scale of strength. In the night form is you get Rest. Rest will simply put enemies to sleep. Again, it's basically a worse form of Laurel, Baruch's third ability, which also happens to be his Helminth ability, as again, it's not a full AoE. This is also Equinox's Helminth ability, and this ability actually does offer two very good buffs, two very good effects, but the fact that it's single target and works on a relatively small AoE makes the ability quite useless again. In most circumstances, you can definitely find niche uses for the ability, but in most circumstances, it doesn't have the most use. However, if this ability were to be changed to be a full 360 degree effect, it would actually be a really great ability. The augment for the second ability does make it so that the effect of the ability will spread to new enemies upon killing them, which definitely does increase the usefulness of the ability, but I do just wish it was a full AoE, as it's still more effort than it is worth. Her third ability is called Pacify and Provoke. First, again, we'll talk about the effects the ability has that affect both versions of it. So both versions are a channeled ability, with a 60-meter radius, creating an aura around Equinox, and the effects of the ability will not only affect Equinox herself, but also affect any ally within that aura. In night form, you will be able to cast Pacify. That means within the aura will have their damage output lowered. So it's basically a damage reduction, except you're actually lowering enemies' output instead of giving yourself a damage reduction. And because of this, it also affects your allies, even if they aren't in the area, because if an enemy tries to shoot them that's in the area, their damage output would be lowered, and therefore kind of giving your ally a damage reduction. It works the same as Puncture, the Puncture status effect. Enemies within the aura are lowered by 50%, as I think I may have said that, and the damage reduction on enemies is capped at 80%. The ability is a bit weird, as the range of the ability is broken up into 4 even circles around the range, 4 even rings, and the effectiveness of the ability degrades the further out the ability gets in based on these rings. What this means is within the closest ring, you get 100% of the effect. At base power strength, that's of course 50% enemy damage reduction. The second ring, the second closest one, will only have 83.33% effectiveness. The third ring has 56.67% effectiveness, while the final ring only has 50% effectiveness. So at base power strength, enemies within the final ring only have their damage lowered by 25%. While the damage reduction is capped at 80%, you will be able to mod past 80%, which will then of course affect the other rings. For example, if you have 200% power strength, which technically gives you 100% damage reduction, since it's capped at 80%, enemies within the first ring will only have the enemy lowered by 80%, and then enemies within the second ring will also have the damage lowered by 80%, as the effectiveness is scaling off the actual true effect of the ability, which is 100%, and 83.33% of 100% is higher than 80, so the second ring will also lower damages. The damage reduction on enemies will be 80%. Meanwhile, the third ring will block 66.67% will lower 66.67% of enemies' damage, and the last ring, of course, will block 50% of the enemy's damage. The ability is a channeled ability, however, it works differently from other channeled abilities, as it drains 0.5% of your energy for every enemy in the area, and it doesn't cancel out ability regen effects like Warframe. In day form, you get the Provoke ability. Provoke will give you and all allies within the area a 20% ability strength buff that is additive with your mods. The ability strength buff does scale with strength, but it caps out at 50%, and you don't have to deal with any of the weird diminishing effects that you get the further out you are. It's flat across the whole area, the whole aura of the ability. The ability, again, it's a channel ability, but works differently, as you only lose energy for each ability cast by either yourself or any ally within the aura, and because this, it also will not cancel out any regen effects, just like Pacify. The augment for this ability will give some additional effects to the ability. The additional effect that Pacify gains is while Pacify is activated, when you or your allies take damage, you will slowly over time, based on the damage you take, gain a movement speed reduction to enemies buff. At base strength, the movement speed reduction does cap out at 40%, but with strength, you will be able to increase that up to 80%. And unlike the damage reduction on enemies, the movement speed is consistent across the whole range of the ability. In day form, however, dealing damage to enemies will give you a additional strength buff on top of the normal strength buff you get from Provoke. At base power strength, that's 50%, but with additional strength, the ability will cap out at 30%. And this is on top of the power strength you get from Provoke. So with a maxed out strength for this ability, you will get 80% power strength, 50% from Provoke, and then an extra 40% from the augment. That fourth ability is Mend and Maim. Another channel ability, just like our third ability, with a range around Equinox. In night form, you get the Mend effect. Any ally within the range of Mend, including yourself, will gain 25 shields each time you kill an enemy. And that shield increase does take you into Overshield, and it does, of course, scale of strength. While this effect is activated, 75% of the damage dealt to enemies will be stored up. And then you can choose to deactivate the ability to then evenly distribute the stored damage you did between yourself and all other allies in your squad as shields. The amount of damage that is stored does not scale off strength. In day form, Maim will create an aura that works somewhat similarly to Silence, as it will stagger enemies when they first enter it, while also doing a tiny bit of slash damage with a 100% status chance. The slash damage does, in fact, scale with strength. And then, while you deal damage to enemies that are within the aura, 75% of the damage dealt will be stored, again, just like with Mend, and that 75% is not scaling off strength, again, just like with Mend. However, this time, deactivating the ability will then redirect all that damage stored to every enemy within the range of Maim. It has no line of sight checks, and it will go through walls. The augment for the ability will allow you to keep the ability activated when you switch between forms,
because both her third and fourth ability will deactivate if you switch between forms normally, but this ability will allow your fourth
to stay active when you switch. It will also allow you to keep storing up the damage for the other version of the ability while you're in a certain form. Basically what this means is if I'm in day form and I cast the ability, I can then switch to night form, go around killing enemies, gain the effect that gives me shields upon killing enemies, while also storing up the damage for Maim. Then I can switch back to day form, deactivate the ability, and then redistribute all that damage, just like would normally happen when you deactivate Maim. So I do have two builds for you here today. I have a build for her day form and a build for her night form, as unfortunately she has basically no synergy between her two forms, which I'll get into more when I leave my review for her. My first build is probably what Equinox is most known for, which is her day form, which is a Maim nuke build. Maim has a very large range, and because it goes through walls, it makes it an incredibly effective nuking ability. The Helminth with this ability is Terrify. Terrify is used because the ability does need an armor strip. It is less needed now after the armor cap, but it is to get the best performance out of the ability, you definitely still want an armor strip. And Terrify is a lot better than Pillage, as it needs a lot less strength to fully armor strip enemies, while also going through walls just like Maim does, and have a much less range. And you don't need to worry about enemies running away because of the Terrify effect, because you'll just cast Terrify and then immediately cast Maim straight after, and the enemies will be dead anyway, so it doesn't matter. Before we get into the Equinox build, the Archon shards I'm using for both builds are 2 casting speed buffs. This is definitely needed because her 4th ability is a bit slow with the casting. I also have 2 Tower Forge strength buffs, giving me 30% ability strength. This is mostly needed for my day form build. And then I have max energy field on spawn. This is just because I won't be running Xeneric on one of the builds, and I like to have this so I don't have to drop energy pad at the start of the mission, while still having enough energy to set up my damage rotation. For the day form build, we have Corrosive Projection as the aura. This will lower the amount of strength we need in order to fully strip enemies with Terrify, as Terrify only needs 167% power strength to actually fully strip enemies, but with Corrosive Projection that is lowered to 137%. Then we have Force Survivability, Catalyzing Shield, and Rolling Guard. We do have a shield gate setup, which is the best option for this kind of build, as you are very casting abilities a lot, and shield gating is honestly still the best form of survivability the game has to offer. So we're using Catalyzing Shield to lower our shield amount so we can fully get all of our shields back upon recasting one of our abilities, while also setting our shield gate to 3.33 seconds. And then of course Rolling Guard for some extra iframes and also status and cleansing, because you definitely want to have status cleansing on any shield gate build. The build obviously runs on very high range, max out range in fact, which is why we're having overextended stretch and overreach, giving Maim a 47.7 meter radius, which is insane. However, as I said, it is most effective on enemies armor stripped, meaning it is most effective in a 39.75 meter radius, which is the radius of Terrify, which is still a very, very big radius considering that it nukes through walls. We do have Prime Flow for energy, of course. We have Streamline to lower the energy cost, and then we have Umbral Intensify, Maim doesn't scale off strength when it comes to nuking. The slash does, the maim does when it staggers enemies when they first enter the effect, but the slash damage is minor, you don't care about it. And the damage it does when you deactivate the ability doesn't scale off strength, neither does the amount of damage you store upon enemies. So you don't need a lot of strength for this build. The only strength you need is the amount of strength you need for nuking, armor stripping with Terrify. So with Umbral Intensify plus the 2 Tower Forged Archon Shards, we do get up to 114% power strength, being offset by overextended. Then we just need to have Provoke activated to give us that extra 22% power strength, which will give us a 136% power strength. And I know I did say that Terrify needs 137% power strength to fully strip our enemies with armor, but with corrosive protection, but with Provoke activated, I am fully stripping enemies. And to prove that, I will activate Terrify without using Provoke, and you'll see the enemies in the back are not armor stripped, fully armor stripped. And if I respawn the enemies, this time I'll activate Provoke, and then I'll cast Terrify, and you'll see all the enemies in the back are fully armor stripped. The arcanes we are using are Arcane Energize for some extra energy economy, and Arcane Aegis for some additional survivability, and of course we are using Prime Sure-Footed. This is extremely important for this build. Not only is Prime Sure-Footed just a mod that you want to use on most Warframes anyway, but this build does use an AoE weapon for its source of that damage store up. So if you aren't using this, then you're going to run into a lot of issues. For the companion, I am using Death Cube for the energy economy. So we have Energy Generator, which will drop an energy orb after every 10 kill assists from Death Cube. Duplex Bond that will spawn up to 3 clones, and each clone have a 50% chance to make enemies drop energy orbs when they kill an enemy. And then we also have Synth Deconstruct, which increases the likelihood of enemies to drop health orbs when they are tagged by our companion. And since Equinox's passive is Equilibrium, we do get energy on picking up health orbs. We also have Contagious Bond, which will spread the status effects on companion kills, which will increase the deadliness of our companion. Guardian for some additional survivability for Guardian and Regen. Guardian for some additional survivability for Equinox. Assault mode, so Death Cube can actually attack enemies. And then Regen, Enhanced Vitality, and Calculated Redirection are all for survivability of the companion itself, while Vacuum is a must-have mod. The companion weapon we're using is Verglass, as it is really the only companion weapon in the game that is capable of any solid DPS. It is a pretty simple build. We have our base damage, faction damage, fire rate, reload speed, and then we just have viral heat, which is our main source of DPS. If you can, I recommend having an unranked room rounds. I just don't have an unranked room rounds, which is why I'm running a ranked one. But you want to have heat do more damage than viral, because it will mean heat has a higher priority when applying status effects, which will increase the DPS of your weapon. For our DPS weapon, when it comes to building up the stored damage against enemies for main, we have the Cooper Bremer. Any AoE weapon will do. I would recommend AoE weapons, as you'll be able to build up a lot of damage very quickly with AoE weapons. I personally just really enjoy the Cooper Bremer, which is why I'm using it. And it is a very basic, simple build. I am using, obviously, Galvanized Shot for the extra multi-shot. We have Critical Delay and Vital Sense for our crit chance and crit damage. Fervor Strike to offset the fire rate delay reduction from Critical Delay. Firestorm to increase the AoE. You definitely want Prime Sure-Footed when running Firestorm. Cryo Rounds mixed with the base viral that my Cooper Bremer gets from the Lich system, which gives me viral. My faction damage and Hunt Omniscient, which will buy Slash, so this is a viral Slash build. We have Vig Supplies as well for an ammo pickup. This is very needed for a weapon like the Cooper Bremer. I see a lot of people saying that the low ammo amount of the Cooper Bremer makes the weapon basically useless. One shot from the Cooper Bremer should be killing 5+ enemies, and with a mutation mod like Vigilant Supplies, that should give you all the ammo you need. Realistically, you should be running at max ammo the entire mission. And then of course we do have Primary Merciless as our base damage. For utility weapons, I do have Epitaph. Doesn't matter what secondary you want to use though, you can run any secondary. I just recommend running the Amalgam Barrel Diffusion for the increased rolling speed, and you 100% want both Augur mods on your secondary build for this setup, because it is a shield gate build. Normally both Augur mods are just an extra bonus. In this build you need both Augur Pact and Augur Seeker on your secondary, as it is a shield gate build, and we rely on the Augur mod set for survivability as we aren't using Brief Respite. And we do use Protos as the melee for the extra sprint speed, plus slide, and parkour velocity. For the focus skill, you can honestly run whatever you want except Narrowmon, because Narrowmon doesn't give you any buffs. You don't need Meta Ray or Xenoric for power strength, you get enough power strength from our second. And then all the other skills aren't really that useful. I'm just running Xenoric for some additional energy economy. For the second build, her Knight build, basically the way we'll be running this is we will have the augment for our third ability to slow enemies while also giving us that indirect damage reduction. And then also gaining shields for our fourth ability. So we're basically simulating Gloom in a way, but instead of being a health Gloom, we are simulating a shield variation of Gloom, while also giving ourselves damage reduction. So for the build, we are running Adaptation for some additional damage reduction. This isn't as good as we are slowing enemies, but as this is a shield tank setup, there isn't really any other better form of damage reduction we can give ourselves, so Adaptation is really our only option. We have Transient Fortitude along with Unintensify for power strength to increase both the amount of shields we get on kill and also how much reduced enemies are damage against us. Peaceful Proclamation, of course, the augments to slow enemies. Prime Continuity for duration, which will lower our drain cost from our fourth ability. Range for some extra range on both of our abilities, and Prime Flow for energy economy. We are running Archon Energize for extra energy economy and Arcane Aegis for some additional survivability. Now for Combat Discipline and Quick Thinking. Now, because the slow is built up based on the amount of damage you get dealt, you basically to make this setup a bit more consistent, we want to be able to self-damage ourselves, which is why we are using Combat Discipline, as it is really the only form of self-damage in the game right now. Quick Thinking is then used because we want to not die from Combat Discipline, basically. As Combat Discipline will make it so instead of being killed, as Quick Thinking will basically make it that instead of being killed by Combat Discipline, we will instead use some energy to basically give us health gain. Now you can 100% use any weapon with this build, it doesn't matter. It is a weapon build that you can go ham with your own creativity. However, I have chosen the Dual Ikers. Dual Ikers normally would have needed an armor strip, but since the armor cap's lower, Dual Ikers is actually pretty good even without an armor strip now, and it's honestly just a really fun melee to play with. This is, of course, its Incarnate variation. So I am running a melee influence build, and I'm killing enemies with a Viral Slash along with the Toxic Puddles that Dual Iker makes. We do have Condition Overload for base damage, we have Berserk Fury for attack range, crit chance, crit damage, and then of course status chance. If you're unfamiliar with Dual Iker's Incarnate form, when it is in its Incarnate form, killing enemies will leave behind Toxic Puddles. Melee Influence will then basically spread that in a massive area, as enemies killed from the status effects from Melee Influence will also spread these Toxic Puddles. Additionally, you'll gain melee damage plus sprint speed and parkour velocity while the Incarnate evolution is activated. For the second evolution, I am running Alchemist Wraith. This does give me an additional 5 combo each time I on target affected by Toxic. I'm not using Toxic on this build, but I do for my Lavos and my Seren build, and I can't be bothered to switch between the two buffs here, as they both give the same amount of base damage buff, and
we'll be using neutral combo anyway, so we won't be benefited from the 30% attack speed on neutral combo from the second evolution. The other
option with the second evolution anyway, so I just keep it on this one. Third evolution is pretty simple, guess. Just you want Auric Reach to increase the reach of the weapon. Reach is a massive increase to DPS with melee weapons, so you definitely want that. And then our fourth evolution, we want Absolute Valor to increase the weapon's base status chance. This is of course a melee influence build, so we do want to have a high status chance. For the utility weapons, we have the Teneglaxton. I don't have it yet, but I am using the Glaxton Forest Augment that increases the drop rate of energy orbs, and also because it freezes enemies really easily. But you can run whatever rifle you want, just make sure you are running both Amalgam Restoration and Primary Dexterity, since this is a melee build, and Primary Dexterity will increase our melee combat duration by 7.5. For the secondary, again, you can run whatever secondary you want, just make sure you're running the Amalgam Barrel Diffusion for that extra utility, and once again Secondary Dexterity, which will further increase our melee combo count by 7.5, making our combo counter go from 5 seconds, which is the default, to 20 seconds. And of course, our focus skill is Narrowmon, because it changes the way combo counter works, as instead of making it so that when you run out of combo, you lose all your restored combo counter, Neron makes it that you only lose 5 combo because of its first skill, Power Strike. The companion we're running is Dirigar because we're going to use it to prime enemies for us for condition overload. The reason why Dirigar is so good for priming is because of these 2 mods right here. Manifold Bond is really the MVP as it applies status effects from the companion's weapon on enemies within area whenever it casts an ability. And then this works really well specifically on Dirigar because Arc Coil, one of Dirigar's ability, only has a 5-second cooldown. And since Manifold Bond will also lower cooldowns by 3 seconds when you kill an enemy with 3 or more status effects, this basically allows Dirigar to spam Arc Coil, and each time it activates Arc Coil, Manifold Bond will prime enemies for us. Tenacious Bond will give us some additional crit damage for our weapon, while Maximus Bond will give us additional element for priming, while also give our companion lower its recovery time if it goes down when we kill an Xmas unit. Guardian for some additional survivability. Regen, enhanced vitality, and catheter redirection is all for the survivability for the companion. Synth Deconstruct for some additional utility from extra health orbs, and then of course Vacuum, which is a must-have. The weapon we are using is Volcax. It is one of the only 2 companion weapons that can get above 50% crit chance for Tenacious Bond, and we do this simply by just running critical delay. Don't mind the Vig mods, that is for some other setups. And then for the other mods, we just have Viral, Heat, and Radiation for priming purposes. Anyway, so those are my 2 builds, the day and night build. Now I will try and make this brief and basically rate her. To begin with, I'm going to give her a B rating on my tier. And if you don't remember, B rating on my tier list is good. A solid Warframe, but nothing special. My reasoning for this is because her first and second ability are both basically useless. And her third ability is... her day form of her third ability can also be useless depending on your setup. This is because you don't need power strength for her fourth ability, so the only reason why you would need her third ability is if you needed the extra power strength for an armor strip like I do, but if you didn't, then it would be useless. The reason why the second ability is useless is because the fact that it's single target, even with the AoE, just makes it kind of very niche and not really useful in most circumstances. You can definitely get uses out of Rage on specific targets, like priority targets like Acolytes, which I definitely do even in my day build, which is why I Helminth off my first ability in the day build. But honestly, they don't really have a use. Even with the augment that spreads the status effect, it's still honestly, like, it needs to be a full AoE. And then her first ability again is useless as she has no synergy between her 2 forms, which is honestly really sad. The only synergy she does have is the augment with her fourth ability, but it's kind of a waste because you're just adding extra steps to... Because the only reason why you would do that is you wanted to gain the extra shields from Mend while also still nuking with Maim, but that just adds extra steps to your damage rotation, and for very little gain, as because you can gain damage so quickly with an AoE weapon, you almost spam Maim, so it honestly will slow down your DPS having to switch between forms all the time. So you really have no synergy between her forms, which is why her first ability basically becomes useless because you never have to switch between your forms. Honestly, I really wish Equinox would get a rework. There are tons of Warframes that are much more in need of a rework before her, because she's not a bad frame. But she has a really cool design, and I think she could be really, really good and really interesting if she actually had synergy between her 2 forms, and if switching between them would actually make sense gameplay-wise, and you could actually do something with it. But because she lacks synergy between her 2 forms, she has a lot of wasted potential, I feel. Anyway, that is all for me. If you enjoyed this video, do check out some of my other content as I post a lot of different Warframe videos. And if you are looking for a build for a Warframe you're interested in, you never know, I might have a build for that Warframe, so check that out. And I also do have I also have a clan Discord, which is also the Discord for my YouTube channel. So if you're interested in joining that to hang out with me in VCs or in the text chats, join our clan or play Warframe with other people, including myself or other people beyond myself as well, definitely check that out as well. Anyway, until next time, bye bye.